Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am so thrilled to be sitting here on stage and screen and stage. We're all stars of stage and screen with three amazing founders, all of whom have been on How I Built This. If you haven't heard their stories, I think you have, but you should go back and listen to them multiple times. I do myself. I refer to all three of these founders all the time, whether I'm speaking about them or writing about them. They are so important because tonight's theme is about impact. And all three of these founders have had huge, huge impact. I know a lot of you out there watching this live stream tonight and participating in the summit are creating businesses with impact. You have ambitions to build something with impact. So this is for you and for the rest of you too. I think all of us are looking to have some type of impact. So let's get right to it. We've got Cathy Hughes, founder of Urban One. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you.
We have Pat Brown, founder of Impossible Foods. I'm sure lots of you have had the Impossible Burger. Pat, welcome.
Thank you.
And Sal Khan, founder of Khan Academy, and the man who is responsible for my children's math scores increasing dramatically over the last year. Sal, welcome.
Good to be here.
I want to start with you, Pat, and I'm going to ask the same question to all three of you. I love your story because you had this really incredibly prestigious career at Stanford. You were involved in all kinds of research, and you were a tenured faculty member. You even started an academic journal plus one, which I refer to all the time in a kids show that I do called Wow in the World. And then you basically walked away from that position to build Impossible Foods, a company that makes meat from plants, that engineers meat from plants, entirely non-animal meat. What motivated you to do that?
Well, yeah, I had a job I loved at Stanford, but one of the things that was part of the job was that I really was free to follow my curiosity and do whatever kind of research that I thought might contribute to the world, and really no boundaries on it. And so when I had a sabbatical, I basically asked myself, what is the most important problem in the world that I can contribute to solving? And I realized that it was the catastrophic impact of our use of animals as a food technology, which is by a wide margin the most destructive technology on Earth, and I think very plausibly the most destructive technology humans have ever invented. And it is almost entirely responsible for a catastrophic collapse in global biodiversity. There's less than a third as many wild animals living on Earth today as there were 50 years ago, almost entirely due to this using animals for food. And a major contributor to climate change, and the best opportunity for us to actually turn back the clock on climate change. So when I came to that realization, I mean, it was like there was no angst, there was no brainer. I have to do this. And I did not know how to do it, but I just believed it was doable and got to do it.
And by the way, we can come back to it later, but we just featured an episode of How I Built This on the chef Daniel Hume. He is the chef at 11 Madison Park. It's one of the most celebrated restaurants on the planet. It's a Michelin 3-star. He announced actually on our show several weeks ago that the restaurant was becoming entirely vegan, an entirely plant-based restaurant. It is the first time a Michelin 3-star restaurant, which as many of you know is literally about 120 on Earth, has done this. So it's a huge deal, and he is super influenced by you, Pat. So we'll come back to you in a sec. Sal, I want to put the question to you. I mean, you were you had a job at a hedge fund. You were being recruited all over the place because of your math skills and your background. You went to Harvard Business School, and you started tutoring relatives online, helping them with math homework. And then as the word kind of spread, you decided to kind of start a nonprofit, Khan Academy, which eventually grew into this powerhouse today. I think you have 40 million people using it a month, including, as I mentioned, my children. It is free. Obviously, people who can should contribute, but it is available for free. And there are hundreds of subjects, hundreds and hundreds of things that courses you can take in math, sciences, history, English. languages is incredible. What motivated you to do that? I mean, you could have done anything you wanted to, and you chose to do this and to make it a nonprofit.
Yeah, in hindsight, I realize that from a very early age, I've always been fascinated by what I would call the education question. I think everyone realizes that it is a major lever point for uplifting who we are as a species. But I think a lot of people have become very cynical about it over time because very smart people have tried to affect it and maybe haven't moved it as much as they would like. But I've always been fascinated by maybe we're at a new phase, confluence of technology and opportunity and what the world needs. But it was always in the back of my mind as I was an analyst at a hedge fund. And then when my cousins needed help with tutoring, part of me just felt very confident that I could help my cousins. So I said, hey, at minimum, I could, and they were in New Orleans, I was in Boston. If I can help them, that makes it worthwhile. But it's also an opportunity for me to get to understand the space better that I've always been fascinated by. And I always used to tell my friends, I enjoyed my job at the hedge fund, but I even used to tell my boss there, I'm going to do this as long as I need to one day start a school on my own terms. That's the best concept I could have of what I might be able to do in terms of impact later on. But when my cousins, and then word spread around the family that free tutoring was going on, my many cousins continued to need more and more help. I said, hey, this is how I can really learn the space, started building tools for them, started making videos, software, and it just kept, people who weren't my cousins were using it, and it just kept growing. And by 2009, my daydreams were this could be a new type of institution. This could be something that, and it was a little bit bizarre, a little bit delusional to think that because there was no archetype for it. It was to some degree, it was easy to start Harvard because you could point to Oxford and Cambridge. You're like, yes, we're going to do one of those on this continent. But my science fiction hat said, well, maybe there's so much else that's happening in the virtual world. Maybe there's an opportunity to create a virtual institution. And I had never worked at a not-for-profit. I had no idea whether the philanthropy would show up, but I'm inspired by what Pat said. He started with the proposition of impact, and then he built from there. He didn't do the market study and figure out where he's going to get a maximum return on investment and all of that. And I think for Khan Academy, it was the same thing. We live once. Do what seems to be right for the planet.
Cathy, I get so many questions about your episode all the time because how many times do people come up to me and they say, Cathy Hughes went to 32 banks until the last one agreed to lend her money to buy her first radio station in Washington, D.C., which you eventually built into a powerhouse media organization. Your story is so inspiring. I love it so much. You were a single mom. You were living in the station with your son on the sofa. I mean, so incredible what you built. What was driving you to do that and to take that kind of risk to build Urban One?
Well, number one, my father was an accountant, and he used to always talk about the law of averages. He used to always tell us back in those days, he sat down for dinner, and the dinner conversation at our house often was about the fact that you should not accept no as an answer. That no more often than not means that you just have not provided the correct information to the person who told you no. And that it did not matter what aspect of life that no was coming from, that you had the ability to change that no into a yes. So after about 15 no's, I realized that what my father had taught me as a child about the law of averages, that there was a yes somewhere in there, and I just had to keep searching for it. And the benefit of being told no that many times, quite frankly, was that my presentation became flawless. I could do it in my sleep. I could have taken a nap in the middle of it because I had done it so many times. But one of the things that I encourage people to do when they receive that no is to ask why someone told you no. Because that's what really helped me fine tune my presentation, because oftentimes they would be very honest. There were things that I had no control over, such as, well, we don't finance. At that time, banks did not realize how lucrative the broadcasting business would become. And so we don't have a broadcast division. Or you're still within the childbearing age. Do you plan to have more children? What will you do if you get pregnant? So each of these objections, each of these no's actually was kind of like the art of war that which did not destroy me made me stronger. I was actually perfecting this sales pitch.
Cathy, how important was it to you? I mean, when you started your first station in Washington, D.C., you were on the air a lot of the time because you couldn't afford to hire people, but eventually it became a hugely important gathering place, particularly for the Black community in Washington, D.C., where important topics and political issues were discussed on the air. How important was creating a Black media company for you as a motivation to building something that was going to actually have an impact on people?
It was the driving force. I mean, you hear a lot about food deserts. My community suffers from an information desert. So often the African American community finds out about something after the fact. And I was a firm believer that I had been chosen to distribute and disseminate information. That's what my driving force was. I wanted desperately. When I was in middle school, I was practicing being on the radio. I did not know that there had already been an African American woman with a syndicated show. And I wanted to be the first. My radio show didn't have, because it was my toothbrush in the bathroom mirror.
Mm-hmm.
I did news. I did public affairs. I was not talking about what the music was. I was talking about information. And I love to be the first to share with my audience things that I knew that they did not know, or very often things that they believed in that were totally erroneous. So correcting things and sharing things was the driving force for me. I felt that my community still very much is in the midst of a information desert. We have a lot of entertainment provided now by every network has discovered the Black consumer. Every network, every outlet has content, but that content, 95% of the time, is entertainment content. It's not telling them about impossible products that you don't know the difference. If you know how to prepare it correctly, you can't tell that that's not a hamburger. The first time I ever had one, I was in Los Angeles, and I was dissecting it at the table. They were looking at me strange. I was pulling it apart. I was trying to figure out how it possibly could have had beets and other vegetables in it and have it taste like ground beef.
Amazing.
That blew me away. And this was very important. This is the type of information that I feel is my obligation to share with my community, because we over-index in diabetes, hypertension, so many things that could be corrected if you just change your diet. But if you don't know what's out there and what's available, that's why I felt it did not matter to me how many people told me no. I knew someone was going to tell me yes.
Yeah. For all of you here, let me start with you, Pat. How important do you think? I know that we're talking about a broad topic, which is impact in entrepreneurship, and all of you have approached entrepreneurship in very different ways. But when somebody is thinking of starting something, do you think, we often hear about how you have to bake mission into everything you do from the very beginning, but I wonder, do you also think you've got to bake in impact, the idea of the kind of impact you could have with your business from the very beginning?
Oh yeah, of course. If there are some businesses, and they're perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned, that really are not meaningfully going to improve the world and so forth, but maybe they give someone a new game to play, whatever. More power to them. But of course, if you're starting a business with the intention of solving a problem, it's all about impact. And that is, that's what I think about. It's like the mission is what got me started. Impact is what we have to do to achieve it. We're thinking about all the time, how do we move this forward? How do we, get to where we need to be in 5 years and stuff like that? And we are absolutely determined to achieve our mission, which I didn't mention, but it's to completely replace animals as a food technology by 2035. So there's a time on it, and that's what we're always thinking about.
I'm curious, Pat, because I remember when you were on the episode, we talked very frankly about money, and I think you live in the same condo you've lived in and since you were a younger academic. I mean, the company's valued at billions of dollars, but for you that's irrelevant. But I wonder, could you have started Impossible Foods as a nonprofit, or did it have to be a for-profit in order to scale it in the way that you wanted to scale it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I think I pretty quickly realized that I couldn't do it as a nonprofit, although somewhat to my embarrassment, my first move when I decided this had to be done and it was going to be, it was going to involve a lot of research and development and stuff like that, was to apply for a grant from the Stanford Woods Institute, which is devoted to environmental stuff. And they were smarter than me, and they basically said, this has to be a business for it to work. And yeah, of course that was true. You couldn't have scaled it as a nonprofit. And the nice thing about it is, this is kind of like maybe just fortuitous, I don't know, but I think it's true of a lot of mission-driven businesses, is that business success and mission success are just almost perfectly aligned. Because we achieve our mission by competition in the market. The market competition, I feel like, is, I'm not a free market lunatic, but it's the most subversive entity on earth. Because if you want to achieve something hugely impactful and you can figure out a way to turn it into to solve it by serving consumers better, making them happier, there's a straight path to success. So, yeah, embarrassingly, I thought briefly about the nonprofit route and it quickly came to my senses.
Sal, you very deliberately chose to make Khan Academy a nonprofit. You were approached by lots of people who said, look, let's make it a for-profit. We can have a subscription model. It can scale. You can also have a nonprofit arm, but you really want to focus on, making sure that it's sustainable, that it scales. But you resisted that. You decided that was not the direction you wanted to go into. And there are lots of people, by the way, who are part of this community and this conference who are starting nonprofits, who want to run a nonprofit, and may be under pressure to make it a for-profit. What advice? I mean, first of all, based on your experience, what advice would you have for others?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. This, Pat and I don't live too far. It's interesting. We sometimes cross paths. He was an academic in the not-for-profit sector. I was one of those lunatic capitalists working as an analyst at a hedge fund. But in that job, I was able to be a student of capitalism, and I would, talk to multiple companies, publicly traded companies every day, and I started to think about how capital structure and ownership affected what they did on a quarterly basis, annual basis. I thought about how the pressures of folks like myself, what motivations and incentives it was providing for folks, and I don't think there's an all-out answer that for-profit or nonprofit one is better than the other. It is, and Pat just alluded to it, how aligned are the market forces going to be with the impact? I think Pat found an incredible place where he's exactly right. The market forces are super aligned with impact. I think education, and not all of education, but there's definitely pockets of education, and I would argue pockets of healthcare, where market forces and what's better for society aren't necessarily aligned. In education, the payer, the decision maker, and the beneficiary are all different people. That's, for the most part, true in healthcare as well. We also have values as a society that if someone wants to learn or someone's bleeding on the foot on the doorsteps of the ER room, you got to serve them. It helps society to serve them, and it's just as human beings we want to do it. So that was the original thinking, and I also imagined that if this were to be a multi-generational institution, free world-class education for anyone anywhere, as impatient as I am, isn't going to happen in the next 10 years. I think we can make a big dent maybe in our lifetimes, but I hope that we continue to push it forward in 100 years, 200 years. And for me, not-for-profit, when I looked at multiple organizations over history, those are the ones that have been able to stay really true to that. But the experiment is still ongoing, and I don't ever regret the decision. But there's definitely moments where certain things are harder as a nonprofit than other things, and sometimes I'm like, well, that would have been easier to maybe raise capital in that way, or maybe to be able to give employees some stock. But then I appreciate the things that have actually been easier for me to stay true to my mission. My board is always pushing me on impact, and impact for those who need it most, which I think is always a really healthy push. And there's just a lot of believers that this type of institution should exist. So far, so good.
Cathy, I mean, oftentimes impact can simply mean, not simply, but can mean who you are, what you represent. I mean, you were the first African-American woman to take a company public in 1999. And I cannot imagine the kind of impact that had on young women and young Black women particularly. And you continue to have impact by virtue of who you are and what you represent. And I wonder whether you think about that from time to time.
Not really on the personal side. I get accused oftentimes by those who are close to me of saying that I don't really realize that I'm Cathy Hughes. My focus has always been on the impact that my company would have. I'm not trying to have the impact myself. I'm trying to empower a team of African Americans to have that type of impact. Because particularly, as you well know, in the media, it's very difficult. The media itself, just by the virtue of the industry we work in, turns you into this quasi-celebrity. And with that, certain responsibilities and expectations. So my focus is always on this team of individuals having the impact as opposed to me having it personally. I know I'm Cathy Hughes. I know that. But I don't want to be an Oprah. I love Oprah. I respect her. I admire her very much for what she has done and the impact that she has had. But that's not the avenue that I chose to travel. I chose to go in a different direction. I have always been what some people have considered controversial. I prefer the word provocative. Oftentimes the truth is harder to sell than an Impossible Burger, because we have been so conditioned in the African American community to be so skeptical. And for so many reasons for that skepticism. Right now, the biggest issue confronting us is the low percentage of African Americans who are willing to take the vaccination for COVID. And some of them are referring all the way back to the Tuskegee study with syphilis, which was eons ago, but still have this mistrust. How important is the information that we try to disseminate 24/7 through not just cable and radio, but also digital, to the African American community so that they can make the right decisions in terms of just living their everyday life. And then on top of it now, the battle that we're having in terms of police brutality being at an all-time high with us. The information, Breonna Taylor is a key battle cry in the Black community now. The issue is that a gun was fired at the police. The police opened fire. Yes, they killed her in her bed. But anytime you open fire on any law enforcement agency, they're going to return the fire. So how do you disseminate enough information for the community to come to the right conclusion of whether she was murdered in her bed, but was she in fact murdered in her bed because they walked in guns blazing, or was she murdered in her bed because her boyfriend shot first and they responded? These are very complicated issues when you have close to 450 years of misinformation about who we are and what's really going on in our community. You come oftentimes to conclusions that are counterproductive to our own progress. And so that's been my obsession, was disseminating enough information, almost like the Khan Academy, almost like impossible products. If you put the information out there and you keep repeating it, you can't put it out there once. You have to really continue disseminating it. You have to believe in your mission, even when you're being discouraged and people are saying, that's not going to work, or we don't want to hear that. So often I get told, I don't want to hear that Breonna Taylor's, boyfriend fired first, but that's the reality. If you understand, anyone who is licensed to carry a gun, okay, if fired upon, is going to return fire. If you put it out there repetitively, it starts to sink in. It really does start to make a difference. Like Mr. Khan, I would hope that my impact may be 200 years from now, but I hope that I will have laid a foundation of the dissemination of pertinent information to my community for them to make the right decision on how can we stop this oppression and suppression that unfortunately we finance ourselves in the Black community. We over-index in every single solitary product and service in the United States. We are the backbone of the economic system, and that system still refuses to give us equality, inclusion, and diversity.
On that point, Cathy, about repeating the message and disseminating the message, it's such an important point, and I want to come back to it specifically with you in a moment, because one of the things that I remember, Pat, that you had talked about with me was that when you describe why people should use your product, it's not to save the planet. It's because it's a good product and it tastes great. And you don't, this is not part of the messaging and I wonder, shouldn't you be shouting that from the rooftops? Like, this is going to be good for the environment and the planet, and you should be doing this. Like, why isn't that the central kind of message that you put out?
Well, I'm I was an educator for many years of my life. I'm an absolutely hardcore believer in the importance of education and getting important information out to people. So that's still true. But what I realized is that's not going to solve the problem, and certainly not going to solve the problem fast enough, because the ongoing environmental catastrophes that the system is causing are happening so fast that we need a fast response. And in terms of addressing climate change, the faster we respond, the bigger the effect, because any kind of greenhouse gas you leave on is going to be heating the planet forever until you pull it out. And the only way you can pull those gases out, basically, in any finite amount of time, is by getting rid of animal agriculture. So that's urgent. So in fact, I just published a paper on this with my Berkeley colleague, Mike Eisen, a scientific article about just an analysis of what would be the potential impact on climate if we could phase out animal agriculture over 15 years. And the answer is, you have no idea how big it is. Anyone who thinks it's bad has no idea how bad it is. That was trying to get the information out. That was me shouting from the rooftop. Yeah. But I also realized that not many people are going to listen to that, and if they hear it, they're not going to change their diet. So it's important, but it's not going to solve the problem.
I wonder, when it comes to Adam, actually last night we had Adam Grant on the show, author of Originals and Think Again, and he does something really interesting. He calls it a creative checkup. Every quarter he sits down and he kind of checks in on what he's working on and kind of disposes some of the ideas and focuses on others. And I know that Pat, you just mentioned sort of trying to measure impact, and Sal, I know that you have to probably do it regularly for your board, but do you, how regularly do you sort of sit down and assess the kind of impact you're having, and how do you measure it? Sal, first to you.
Yeah, there's I guess, more immediately quantifiable ways of measuring impact, and we think about it as reach times engagement times efficacy, and you can come to some numbers. And reach you can measure in real time if you're running a website like Khan Academy. Engagement, you can also measure how much time people are spending on average. Efficacy is the trickier one in the education realm. The way it's historically done is you try to do linking studies. You try to show, okay, students who are in the variable group and the treatment group who are using Khan Academy, they're growing this much while the other students are growing this much, or at least there's a correlation, association between engagement on Khan Academy and growth. We have more, I would say, not moonshot, because I think we're going to do it in the next year or two, projects where we're going to instrument for efficacy within the actual software. You can imagine we have millions of folks coming every day. And now that we're working much more focused with districts, and we understand, okay, that is a sixth grader with these demographics in Las Vegas. And so we can get better information about how it's working for various students. And so we're trying to instrument that in the product. But we're also trying to make sure that we're not counting some of the intangibles that are happening. We did a survey at some four-year colleges just to get a sense of how students were feeling about Khan Academy. This was 6 or 7 years ago when we were about 1/5 the scale that we are now. And the question was random undergrads, has Khan Academy had a meaningful impact on your education? And I was assuming maybe 5%, if we're lucky, would say yes. And it turned out 60% said yes, and 65% of first-generation students. And at first I was like, well, when we look at just our numbers every month, it doesn't look like 65% of all American children, or for sure global children, but even American students are on our site every month. But it turns out when we read the comments, we would get students telling us there was that one night in chemistry in 11th grade that I was stuck, I was desperate, I was feeling stressed, and Khan Academy had my back at 11 p.m. And I will forever be grateful for that. Or my school did not have a rigorous calculus course, and I'm a first-generation student, and that Khan Academy course was the only way that I had the confidence to even think about applying to a school like Stanford and becoming a math major. So it's those types of things that we're also trying to, it's hard to quantify in numbers, but we want to make sure that we don't forget about that, because sometimes you can get so fixated on measuring certain things that you forget about all of the other potential positive or negative externalities that you're having.
Cathy, you run a media organization, kind of like, obviously we're smaller. I built this, but you have a vast media organization. How do you kind of take stock of impact and measuring impact regularly?
Absolutely. We stay in a research mode. Research. When I couldn't afford other things in my company, I could always count on funding my research efforts, because I also did not want to be in the position of deciding for my community what I thought they needed or wanted.
Yeah.
I wanted to make certain that I was in line with what I did not want to be a self-proclaimed advocate for them. I wanted to be an advocate that was carrying out their wishes. But one of the problems that's confronting media now, particularly Black-owned media, is the whole issue of disparity in terms of the representation of the profit margin that we represent with corporations and the amount of advertising that is actually spent with Black-owned media. But it all starts with the research, because someone else validates whether or not I'm having an impact. Right. And the reality is, if they can't see me, if they don't understand that I'm under attack, how can they count me accurately? If they do not see me, they cannot count me. And so, unfortunately, as you well know, in media, we're dependent on outside counters. So very much like the Khan Academy, I get research that wouldn't be accepted, as being empirical, evidence. But when I, run into someone who says, for me recently, my annual award show, I turned into in honor of Black womanhood. Yeah. And when I run into a 24-year-old who says to me, I know I can do anything I want to do. I just got my college degree. I saw your show, Miss Hughes, and I realized that I could become a mayor. I could become Stacey Abrams. Then I know that I'm really having an impact that even the rating services say to me, you're not really having the impact. One of the biggest issues with Black media, Johnson Publishing at one time was the ultimate in Black media for my community. It's gone now because it could not keep and could not attract and keep advertising revenue. All advertising revenue in my industry is based on your ratings, and I have a group of individuals telling me who's watching, who's listening, who's going online. And so I thank God for digital, because with technology, very much like the Khan Academy, it's made my research so much easier. But still, advertisers do not take my own self-analysis of what impact I'm actually having. They depend on the Nielsen. They depend years ago on Arbitron. Other individuals who don't understand me nor my culture are verifying whether or not I'm having an impact in my community. That's a problem that's going to have to be addressed before we can actually demand of major corporations that they give us our fair share of advertising dollars. It's a catch-22 for Black-owned media.
You know, it's so interesting, because when you talk about the people who say, and I know about your award show because we talked about this, and it was so cool. You were the host of it. You know, when people say, hey, you know, hearing you or hearing this content's inspired me to do X, Y, or Z, or Sal, you know, going to universities and hearing that feedback, or just meeting people who say, oh my God, you got me through calculus. Like I took this leap. It really kind of underscores this idea that impact can be this hugely powerful motivating force. I mean, I think about what we do, and what drives me every day is not the money I make. It's not the money we make. It's not, and it's, you know, we're nonprofit. NPR is a nonprofit, but it's the fact that people contact us every single day to say, I was about to give up. I kept going. I heard Sal Khan's episode, or I heard Cathy Hughes's episode, or Pat Brown's episode, and I heard these people taking swings for the fences, and I kept going. And it's so crazy for me to say this, but because I sound like a self-help guru, but how I built this, what we do, actually impacts lives. It actually changes lives, and I would never have said that 2, 3, 4 years ago, because I would have thought that was a little over the top. But that is what drives us. That's what pushes us. It's not profit or chasing dollars. It's actually the impact that people tell us it has on their lives. You know what I mean, Pat? Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest motivator for most people on Earth, is that, you know, everything else is sort of, there's short-term stuff that you care about, but your ability to really make, you know, make a positive impact on the world. I mean, that's the long-term thing. I'm thinking about that 24/7, basically. I mean, even in my dreams, I'm thinking about what, you know, what can we do to maximize our success and our rate of success and so forth to achieve our long-term goal. I can't imagine any more powerful motivator. I mean, money is just money. Who cares? It's, you know, I'm always baffled by people who why would you, you know, especially if it's fine if you're, you know, you need the money to support your family and stuff like that, of course, but beyond that point, what's the value of it unless you can make the world better for
in some way. Maybe I agree with you fundamentally. I don't want to disparage in any way people who are looking to make money. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, one of the, and this kind of gets me to my next question, which is, in a few minutes, we're going to meet the How I Built This Fellows. And every year we pick a group of emerging startup entrepreneurs, and we help them kind of develop their ideas and give them mentorship and guidance. And we bring in alums from the show to do that. And this year we're going to give one of those winners, one of those fellows, a $50,000 check to launch their business. Now, out of those 10 founders, they're all amazing ideas, and they're all going to create profitable and sustainable businesses. But the question is, will they all create businesses that will grow and scale 10, 100x? And in some cases, it's not likely. In some cases, it's, you know, one of our fellows wants to open up a chain of Black bookstores. One of our fellows wants to focus on healthcare for Indigenous Americans, Native Americans. One of our fellows is focused on using goats to clear land instead of gas-powered machines. All of these are ideas with incredible impact, and also ideas that wouldn't necessarily attract venture capital. The incentives in our system aren't necessarily there to support businesses that are really about impact. Do any of you have any thoughts, Sal? Do you have any thoughts about how we might change that paradigm?
Change the paradigm of having more people thinking about scalable impact?
Or the idea that the incentives are really only there for companies that can show that they can 10x or 100x.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an I tend to be in the camp of, if you really push yourself, there usually will be a model that can support it. I think Pat is a great example of that, right? Like, it's not obvious at first glance that is the vector, but it actually is. And he's able to create a model that actually scales. And so I think in any of the examples that you just gave, if you're thinking about the underlying problem that you're trying to solve, I do think there's ways to scale it and grow. Now, the one thing that we have to work on is sometimes even our own, even the entrepreneurs themselves, our mindset. What do we need to be able to do this? How much capital do we need? How are we going to motivate the right people to join forces? How do we bring other stakeholders to the table? But I think we're actually at a bit of a golden age in society right now, where there's more access to resources. The threshold to get stuff started has never been lower. There's still thresholds, and you're going to get turned away a lot, but it's never been lower than it is right now in history. So my encouragement would be, we don't have to engineer society a lot. It really is just a little bit more of the belief that it's out there. It's not going to be easy. If it was done, someone would already be in that lane.
Yeah.
And I would say that, I mean, Cathy's experience is an illustration that it doesn't have to be something that has to scale 1,000-fold to be able to be a good business proposition. You were able, Cathy, to get loans based on your idea, which was initially presumably just asking for money to buy a radio station, not to build a global empire. And so I think, don't worry if your idea is a good idea and you're excited about it, but it's not going to be Walmart. If it's going to do something that serves a need, I think there's a case to be made that it can succeed as a business.
And I'll just add to that. I think I go back to the early days of Khan Academy. As an entrepreneur, if you prepare yourself that even the small scale wins are worth it. Hey, I was able to help my cousin. That was worth my time. Hey, I'm able to help 100 cousins or 100 people now. That is worth my time. So the wins are worth it. But then also think about,
Absolutely.
well, can I scale it? But be satisfied with the impact you're having.
Yeah.
I think that's a key word. I think sometimes that we put expectations on ourselves when we go into business. And so when the rough times come, we give up. We get frustrated. We're like, I'll make more money if I go work for someone else. Well, there were many times where individuals said that to me, but I wouldn't listen, because you have to be totally committed to your belief. You cannot allow anyone, no circumstance, no individual to deter you from your mission. But you got to be totally committed to that mission. That's how the scale occurs. You just continue. Martin Luther King said, if you're a street sweeper and you do it every day to the best of your ability, one day the world will recognize the fact that nobody can sweep a street as well as you. Doesn't matter what it is. But so often, particularly with young entrepreneurs, they expect instant. It's what the media feeds them, instant gratification. They think that they're just going to open the business and all of a sudden they're going to be able to do whatever they want. Okay, they're going to be able to go on vacations. They're going to be able to live a lifestyle. Oftentimes, a lot of entrepreneurs go to their graves never achieving that, going on vacation and doing whatever they wanted, but they didn't give up on the mission.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the second or the third generation that will bring it to that scale because they grew up in it. But you have to be totally committed. You have to have realistic expectations of what you can achieve, and you cannot allow anyone or any circumstance to allow you to take your eye off the prize that you're seeking.
I think that's a big advantage of a mission-driven company because, you know, I'm sure everyone who's had a mission-driven company, you go into it knowing there's going to be endless. First of all, I don't have a roadmap, so I have no idea what problems I'm going to encounter, but I'm guaranteed to encounter lots of challenges. And but if you were just in it, you know, for the money, you'd say, I don't need the grief. You know, there are easier ways to make money, and you're more likely to you know, quit. I think having a mission to inspire you is, I think, incredibly valuable. You know, when you run into challenges and potholes and stuff like that, you know, yes, there are way easier ways to make money, but I'm not giving up.
I think about all three of your stories, Cathy. You know, all the struggles you went through. Pat, I mean, there was a point where you guys poured tons of time and effort into research. After a year, and it didn't. We had to basically abandon it. Sal, trying to raise money for Khan Academy, it took you so long. You weren't sure whether it was going to survive. I want to ask you all a kind of I hope it's not too provocative, but I'm really curious about this big question, and I've had conversations about this over the past year. Certainly, as we've watched demonstrations across the United States, around the world. About racial injustice, there is increasingly there has been a growing conversation around capitalism. Is the current model of capitalism that we all operate under, that we all you know, we all basically pursue, is it sustainable? Pat, I mean, Pat, let me start with you. I mean, does a part of capitalism have to change if we are going to create things that make impact for a better world?
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting question. I hadn't really thought about it in those broad terms. I think that there are tremendous problems with the you know, the current economic system. Let's just say that it has very few checks and balances, and has the ability to just create wide inequalities and you know, and exacerbate them. I think that, but I'm not a policy guy, but I think that there are, you know, I would hope, so I'm in my own company because I'm the boss. I can try to have a culture and a way that we treat employees and so forth that is not copying the problems that are endemic. But I think that it would it would take a lot of brains to figure out a realistic way to do a reset on it. But yes, it's got a lot of problems. But on the other hand, the alternative might be worse, because you want to have a system that enables anyone with an idea, and you know, there are inequalities that prevent this from being true, but anyone with an idea to have the best possible chance to pursue it and turn it into something meaningful.
Cathy, any thoughts about capitalism or ways to maybe slightly tweak capitalism to make it a more equitable system?
I'm like Pat. I haven't really thought about that in the broad sense of, I mean, right off the top of my head, I would say yes, but at the same time, I'm sure Sal will say it is being tweaked constantly. It is being changed. It is evolving, because if it can't remain stagnant. It can't, because it's a global, we have to fit into this global economy. But I would like to really put some thought into that. You've put something on my mind that I'm really going to discuss with some other individuals, because I don't know, maybe Mr. Khan would have a different perspective. He lived on both sides. I've never done the nonprofit side.
Sal?
Yeah, I actually, you know, I read a lot of science fiction, and I think a lot about this question about where society is going over the next 50 or 100 years. And In the industrial age, you had a labor pyramid where you needed a lot of, let's say, low-skilled labor to work in the factories, and then you need some mid-skilled labor to work in the office jobs, and then you had the top of the pyramid, which was the entrepreneurs, the owners of capital, the doctors, lawyers, engineers, journalists, whoever else, academics. We know what's going to happen to society on its own. Automation is going to collapse those bottom two layers. At the same time, in theory, we're going to have all this extra productivity. And if all of that productivity just goes to the top of that pyramid, you're definitely going to have social instability. You don't have to be a deep historian to know what's going to happen. And so the way I see it is you only have two options. You're either going to have massive redistribution, which I don't think is going to be good for anybody, because we've seen in places like Saudi Arabia, even when the government is able to issue large checks to people, it just doesn't give them a sense of purpose, and their skills as people atrophy. And so the only other option in my view is you got to invert that pyramid. You got to create a world where almost everyone can be an entrepreneur, a researcher, get to that Star Trek reality. If you look at Star Trek, no one's working in a factory. Everyone is an artist, an explorer, a researcher. And it sounds utopian, but once again, mass public education was utopian 200 years ago. And I think this idea that everyone can be a knowledge worker doesn't have to be utopian. And we now have the tools at our disposal, those same tools that are driving all this productivity to the top of that pyramid to disseminate knowledge, information. I think we're going to re-architect our credentialing systems. So it's going to be a much more frictionless pathway for people to recognize their possibilities.
You're sounding like one of my favorite characters that you introduced me to, Harry Seldon, from the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, and you inspired me to start to dive into that. So thank you for that. One quick question for all of you, just briefly before we have to wrap up. In which industries do you see the most promise now for entrepreneurs to make an impact?
Well, I mean, I may be myopic about this, but when I never thought about the food industry until I got into this gig. I was not thinking about food. I wasn't that interested in business. But once I looked at it, I realized, holy cow, this is a massive desert of innovation, okay? There's been nothing fundamentally new in that food system in millennia, okay? And so much possibility for improving it, and so important for human welfare. And once you look at it, you realize, it looks only a tweak from what it looked like hundreds of years ago, but there are so many things we can do to make it, food more affordable, more accessible, more secure, less destructive. I think there's endless opportunities. I feel like, please, more people should come into this field and compete with Impossible Foods or do all the millions of things that we don't have the bandwidth to do that could make the food system better. That's my view.
All right, food. Cathy?
I think service. I think that it's increasingly difficult to find experts in so many areas of service. Artisans, it used to be the neighbor down the street could fix your car, could put the towel in your room. I think that service in a different sense of the word, particularly in healthcare. I think that our population is aging. I think this whole issue of providing for elderly individuals, whether relatives or neighbors, in a humane fashion and making it affordable. I think as the Khan Academy has proven that everything doesn't have to be tied into a big financial return in order for it to have impact. But I would say the service, I think products, yes, but I think service that we have to really learn how to be more of service to each other and to perfect our crafts in that area again, like we used to in years ago.
Love that. Sal?
I think there's a bunch of areas where, I think generally speaking, some of the stuff happening in agriculture, what Pat's talking about, I think what's happening in biotech, I think we're about to hit something very, transformational to humanity with things like CRISPR that can get weird, but it's going to be interesting. But with my limited time, I've given the offer to both social and for-profit entrepreneurs. The only thing that I would be willing to kind of join the board of is something that is actually going to improve the human condition. And I think above and beyond things like the agriculture, I do think eating meat is going to be what future generations are going to really judge us for. They're going to say, how barbaric. They knew it too. And I eat meat, so I'm a hypocrite. I was a vegetarian for 1 year, and then I didn't have the self-control. But I know I'm a hypocrite. So I think that's a super powerful vector. But I think health, well-being, happiness, you're seeing it. Who would have thought that Headspace, a meditation app, would have so many users and generate so much revenue? There's just we have a wealthy society. People are eating enough. People have their shelter. They have their air conditioning, their heating, but they're still not happy. They feel lonelier than ever. There's less purpose than ever. They're feeling stressed and anxious more so than ever. And I think if anyone who can even make a little dent in there is gonna find something that really makes a big difference.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. If you want Sal Khan on your board, you've got to build something that's going to improve the human condition. I think that's a pretty great prospect. I can tell you, the three of you, that over the past year since I released my book, I've done, I don't know, hundreds of interviews. And ask any of those people, I cite the three of you probably more than any other founders when I'm asked about impact, when I'm asked about people who really took swings for the fences. Thank you, all three of you. Thank you, Pat Brown, Sal Khan, Cathy Hughes. You're the best. Thank you for joining us and being part of this community. And I cannot thank you enough. You are the best.
Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All of exposure.
Thank you, Cathy, and great to see you, Sal.
And
Likewise.
all of you and all of you watching, please stand by, because in just a few minutes we are going to announce the winner of the How I Built This Fellows Pitch Competition, and we will reveal here live who won and who will receive a $50,000 grant from us to start their business back here in just a few minutes.